From WABE in Atlanta, this is Savory Stories, a show where we take a look at Atlanta's people through its cuisine and food history.
On this podcast, we trace Atlanta's food story from the past to the present, getting to know Atlanta's culinary creators and demystifying stereotypes about food.
I'm Akila McConnell, culinary historian and author of A Culinary History of Atlanta and owner of Unexpected Atlanta Tours and Stories, where we introduce locals and visitors to Atlanta's stories, foods, and neighborhoods.
And I'm Chef Asata Reid, owner of Life Chef, where we help you live a life you love, and author of How to Feed a Kid, A Parent's Guide. Today, we're breaking down potatoes in their most delicious form.
And, Asata, when we think of Atlanta's iconic foods, we always think about Coca-Cola, Chick-Fil-A, and Waffle House. But I bet you've never thought about potato chips in connection with our city. And we should. Atlanta should proudly proclaim itself as the city of the potato chips. And on today's episode of Savory Stories, we're going to be talking about our city's connection to America's favorite snack food.
Now, I would have thought that Atlanta's favorite snack food would be like popcorn or funnel cake or something, but I'm happy to hear it's my favorite snack, potato chips.
Yeah, and let's actually back up and talk about the history of the potato chip. Now, this is a history that goes between both fact and legend because nobody actually knows when or where it was invented. And Asada, I bet you've heard this legend before. It's that there were two Black indigenous cooks named George Speck and his sister, Catherine Wicks, and they worked at Carrie Moon's Lake House in Saratoga Lake, New York in the 1850s, and they were the inventors of the potato chip. Have you heard this story?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so the story goes like this. They used to cook for Cornelius Vanderbilt, the famous multimillionaire, and Vanderbilt was apparently a very curmudgeonly customer. He could never remember George Speck's last name and instead used to call him Crumb. So Speck could have taken offense, but he did not. He embraced the nickname, saying that a crumb is bigger than a speck. And Speck's sister claimed that one evening they were trying to please Vanderbilt. They kept on making French fries for him and he kept on sending the order back. Finally, she chipped off a piece of a potato that was basically the thinness of a slice of paper, which by accident fell into a pan of fat. Her brother, George, tasted it. They served it to Vanderbilt, who loved the recipe, and this became their signature food, which they called Saratoga chips, and they even went on to open their own restaurant, which they called Crumbs.
That's interesting. Now, I'm not even going to talk about that microaggression that never remembering someone's name is. We're going to let that go.
No. I hear you on that. I totally feel you on that one.
Let's get deeper into the mystery of the origin of these potato chips.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is the George Speck story is legend. They definitely were the ones who popularized the potato chips, but I don't agree that they were the ones who invented it because invention means it's the first time that something has been made. So let's actually get into the facts. The fact is that far before the mid-1800s, people were certainly frying thinly sliced potatoes. Potatoes are one of the hundreds of agricultural products indigenous to the Americas, first invented and cultivated by the Incans in Peru sometime in around 200 AD. In Peru, even today, you can find more than 4,000 varieties of potatoes.
Wow.
It's amazing,
That's
right?
a lot of potatoes.
It's a lot of potatoes, and they are beautiful. If you ever get the chance, you should look a picture up of these potatoes, every color imaginable. Indigenous people, they didn't really cook with a great deal of lard or fat prior to colonization, and that's because the indigenous people did not domesticate animals for consumption prior to colonization. Cows, sheep, goats, and horses, these were all domesticated in Europe and brought to the Americas. So the primary fat used by the indigenous people prior to colonization would have been bear fat. That is really hard to come by, right?
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah. So there were Muskogee and Cherokee here in pre-colonial Georgia, and they were certainly planting and cooking potatoes, but they wouldn't have been frying those potatoes because it was really hard to get bear fat. But once Europeans introduced pigs to the Americas in the early post-colonial period, Native Americans began frying potatoes. In fact, there is in 1629 a description from a Chilean monk saying that he ate papas fritas, which he said were delicious.
Papas fritas, fried potatoes. Well, that's fascinating, Akila. And when you say bear fat would be hard to come by, you're not kidding, because that is a whole apex predator right there. So, delicious potatoes have been part of many cultures, even indigenous cultures, but they just weren't deep fried, right?
That's right. And on the other side of the ocean in Europe, you wouldn't have gotten any fried potatoes until the late 1700s. Now, just need you to understand this. This is so hilarious to me. Potatoes were introduced to Europe in the 1500s, but many Europeans for nearly 2 centuries believed that eating potatoes caused leprosy. And so they were not grown, they were not cultivated in Europe for nearly 200 years after introduction.
All right, so I'm curious as to how they made that connection between leprosy and potatoes, but go on.
There were all sorts of myths like that. They believed that eating tomatoes and eggplant would make you go insane. All sorts of things, all sorts of myths. Now, the first Europeans to adopt the potato were actually the Irish in the early 1700s. But by the mid-1700s, potatoes were being eaten across the continent, including in Belgium and France. The French, in particular, became known for a dish where they thinly sliced the potato and fried them in lard or duck fat, calling them pommes frites that we know today as French fries, of course. And this recipe soon made the return journey to the Americas.
Okay, one time for anything fried in duck fat, first of all. But how did pommes frites make their way from France to become the American French fries? That's iconic.
By 1802, James Hemings, the black head chef for President Thomas Jefferson and brother of Sally Hemings, had introduced pommes frites, or what President Jefferson described as, and I quote, potatoes served in the French manner, to the White House.
I remember when my son was in pre-K and they introduced Chef James Hemings, and his potato chip legacy is part of Black History Month.
And when we get back, we'll talk more about this very important evolution of the potato from fries to chips. It's not a long hop from French fries to potato chips. Both foods require thinly slicing potatoes and frying them in some type of fat. Now, between 1822 to 1840, numerous recipe books describe potatoes sliced thinly into rounds and then fried. And that, Asata, sounds an awful lot like potato chips to me. So when George Speck served up his Saratoga chips in the 1850s, I can't say that he invented it, but he certainly popularized it, especially because famous men like Cornelius Vanderbilt swore by this snack. And Atlanta, it was always looking to be as fashionable as New Yorkers, so it is no surprise that within 20 years, the Saratoga chip had taken the city by storm. So by 1876, Georgia newspapers were providing recipes for potato chips. By 1894, grocery stores were advertising their Saratoga chips, and even in 1895, the Atlanta Constitution advertised a strange-looking Saratoga potato chipper, which is certainly a one-use tool.
Yes, that's specific.
I've actually included a picture in the show notes of it, but you can see that this was meant to cut potatoes as thin as paper, and you basically place the potato between a blade and a wheel, which you would attach to a countertop. I don't think you could have used it for anything else.
It's like a deli slicer, but for potatoes.
So the real invention with potato chips was that they became one of the first pre-made foods that could be easily transported across the country. Now, imagine to yourself, by the late 1800s, Saratoga chips were being freshly fried, placed in tins or glass bins, and they were being shipped on trains and then scooped into little paper bags that were stapled together. Now, the problem was that potato chips shipped in barrels and tins left the chips at the bottom super stale and crumbled. I don't think there's anything worse than a crumbly potato chip.
Maybe a stale one.
Ooh, yes. Ooh, terrible. So as you can imagine, because these chips at the bottom were all getting destroyed, they were relatively expensive, approximately 15 cents for a small bag, which is a lot considering that you could buy a Coca-Cola in that time frame for 5 cents. And because this was an expensive food, you would even see potato chips on menus for super high-end dinners. For example, in 1898, the Atlanta Journal wrote a story about a Mrs. John Miller who hosted an elegant party with beautiful floral decorations, a 10-course dinner, including oysters, broiled pompano, fruit salad with mayonnaise dressing, orange sherbet, and potato chips.
I love it. Potato chips with French onion dip is still elevated food for me.
Me too. Absolutely. But a female entrepreneur solved the issue of these crumbly, stale chips in the 1920s.
Of course she did.
Yeah, because, we've already talked about Black entrepreneurs like George Speck, and now we're going to talk about Laura Scudder. So she was from California, and in 1926, she used to have her employees take home sheets of wax paper and had them iron the sheets into bags, which kept the chips really fresh and crisp longer, allowing potato chips to become a mass market product. And it's right around that time that Herman Lay moves to Atlanta.
Hey, wait a minute. Herman Lay, like Lay's potato chips, like the ones in my kids' lunch?
Yeah, that Herman Lay. So he arrived in Atlanta in 1932 at the age of 24. And he honestly didn't care what he sold as long as he was selling. He actually opened up his first business at age 10, peddling Pepsi-Cola bottles at his front yard. I think that might have been just totally antithetical to Atlanta, considering this was a Coke town. Anyway, he dropped out of college, finding it didn't suit him, and he went on to sell peanut butter and peanut butter crackers for Sunshine Biscuit in Atlanta on Mitchell Street in downtown Atlanta today. Unfortunately, he lost his job due to the Great Depression, and ever persistent, he wrote 200 letters to prospective employers. Asata, he had some really bad luck. That kind of turned into good luck. He only got one response back from Barrett Potato Chip Company in Atlanta. Mass market potato chips had just gotten underway due to Laura Scudder's invention. And frankly, Lay was not at all impressed by potato chips. He turned the job down, hoping he could find something better. But a week later, when he still couldn't find work, he started selling Barrett's potato chips out of his Ford Model A at road stands, filling stations, soda shops, grocery stores, schools, and hospitals here in Atlanta.
This guy's a hustler.
He was a hustler. He totally was. Lay became Barrett's most successful salesman. When Barrett passed away, Lay raised $60,000 to buy the company. In 1939, he renamed it to H.W. Lay and Company, and the headquarters were on Boulevard in Atlanta, and he had just about 25 employees, not a huge operation, and then he started producing his own line of snack foods.
Okay, pause, because my mind is so blown right now. All these years, I had no idea Lay's Chips was an Atlanta-based company.
It was, and I will tell you what, here was his genius. For nearly 75 years, everybody had been calling potato chips Saratoga chips. That was just the name of them. But Lay named his product Lay's potato chips. And in 1944, they became the first snack product manufacturer to run television ads. They used to feature a potato they called Oscar. Oscar was like a smiling humanoid little potato, and the ad stated that he was happy because everybody liked him. I don't know, there's some cannibalism feeling about this advertisement, but it was super successful, and Atlanta newspapers and TV were among the first to run these ads with Oscar since the company was based in Atlanta. Oscar even became so popular that Lay's Potato Chips sponsored a parade float for the Orange Bowl Parade in 1950, which you can see a picture of in the show notes. Lay's Potato Chips, because they were being sold at such a high volume, the company was able to sell their snacks cheaply. In 1944, you could get a really large bag of Lay's Potato Chips for about 10 cents, maybe about $1 in today's money. And it became an easy and cheap snack to complement sandwiches, picnics, barbecues. Now, in 1961, Lay merged his Atlanta business with Frito Corporation, creating what we know today as the Frito-Lay Corporation. Unfortunately, they closed their Boulevard offices here in Atlanta, and they moved the headquarters to Texas. But given that Lay's potato chips were produced and invented in Atlanta and then reestablished in Texas, It should be absolutely no surprise that when the company began offering flavored chips in 1965, the very first flavor was Georgia's and Texas's favorite meal, barbecue-flavored potato chips.
Of course. That makes total sense. Barbecue is a Southern staple.
And today, Lay's potato chips, first started in the Old Fourth Ward in Atlanta over 100 years ago, is the largest supplier of potato chips across the world, with a 41% market share of the $32 billion worldwide potato chip industry.
Akila, that is incredible. What I love about this story is that he started off a small business, just Lay in his Ford Model A, selling his product everywhere. So let's take some time talking about small businesses in Atlanta making potato chips today, because maybe they're going to be the next Lay potato chips.
Well, I'm ready. Give us some suggestions on what we should be eating now in our city.
Okay, well, Akila, as you know, the entrepreneurial spirit is such the heart of Atlanta. Let's talk about Symphony Chips, another ATL-based business founded by DeAndre Anderson and his two daughters, Amina and Amari. The chips are kind of a happy accident, actually. They were discovered when DeAndre, who already had a line of seasonings called All A Spice, conducted taste tests for his products. He would sprinkle his gourmet seasonings on chips so that potential customers could taste the blends, and boom, Symphony Chips was born. They promote their snacks as all natural, vegan-friendly, gluten-free, and MSG-free, which does stand out in the flavored chip game, with unique flavors centered around themes like smoked, balsamic, and original. Symphony Chips also stand out as one of the few Black-owned chip brands in the U.S.
And I absolutely love their original flavor. It is so tasty, highly recommend it, and less greasy than a lot of other chip brands that you might get.
All right, let's talk about another Black-owned snack brand that has taken Atlanta by storm, Wrap Snacks. This isn't an Atlanta-based company. In fact, its founder, Lindsay James, is a Miami-based entrepreneur from Philly. But stick with me here. James's background was in marketing, and he applied that genius to the snack game when he founded Wrap Snacks by partnering with Universal Records and putting their hip-hop artists on his chip bags.
Brilliant marketing. The bags are so cool looking. I love them. They're like collector's items.
Right? I've seen fast food chains attempt this approach as well, but I think Wrap Snacks really nailed it. Anyway, here's where the tie to Atlanta comes in. You know Atlanta loves our homegrown artists, right? We stand for the home team. Well, Wrap Snacks featured the Atlanta-based group Migos and artists Lil Baby and Rick Ross on their chips. The kids couldn't get them fast enough. There were groups on social media spilling the tea on where you could find specific bags of Wrap Snacks featuring their favorite artists, because when they first came out, the snacks didn't have wide distribution. Now they're in Walmart, but you used to have to roll through the hood and get up in a little bodega-type shop and see if they even had the Wrap Snacks, much less the ones with Rick Ross on them.
Yeah, and, I remember for a little while, Slutty Vegan did a little partnership with them as well, and those sold out so fast. So, yeah, it's definitely was one of those things where you had to go there, you had to be there, you had to know where to get those particular Wrap Snacks.
Yep. The other thing that set Wrap Snacks apart from other chips was the flavor profile. First of all, the flavors are dialed up. There's no sleepy sour cream and onion here. Secondly, they're combined in a way that really appeals to young folks who grew up loving things like Flamin' Hot Cheetos and Takis. So, for example, all-in flavor is a combination of salt, vinegar, onion, garlic, and barbecue. And that totally sounds like something a teen would throw together. Look, Akila, do your kids do this thing when there's a soda fountain where they get a little bit of this flavor, a little bit of that flavor, and they try to put it all together and make a new flavor?
Yes, and I will tell you something. My children claim not to like spicy food, but they will just down a whole bag of Takis. So right. This whole all-in flavor, I get this. It's brilliant.
Yeah. So my kids are always like, here, taste this new flavor. And I'm like, yeah, it tastes like high fructose corn syrup and tooth decay. But anyway, back to the snacks. These big, bold flavors are all combined kind of randomly, but in a way the kids absolutely love. The company grew to a $5 million operation, basically selling bags of chips for 50 cents, which is pretty remarkable. But we have to give a shout out to Master P, who's also partnered in this project, because it was his marketing ingenuity. Like he was out there slinging records. He was out there slinging these chips and getting them in front of everybody. The product line has expanded to beverages, other forms of snack chips like puffs and nachos, and they even have a ramen noodle line.
Brilliant. Perfect for the Gen Z. Is it Gen Z?
I don't know. We're running out of letters.
It's some gen, next gen. But I absolutely love the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, that's so Atlanta.
Well, thank you all so much for joining Savory Stories. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you do that kind of thing with your favorite podcasts.
And we'll be back in a few weeks with another episode. We'll see you then.
Savory Stories is produced by Crystal Devone and Kevin Rinker with additional production and editing from Scotty Crow. The series was created by Summer Evans and premiered on City Lights with Lois Reitzes. For more info, visit wabe.org/Savory Stories.